Number 2 worst. The War of the Simpsons. Oh look, we go from an episode that does everything a lot of marriage dramas do but better, to a pretty lackluster marriage drama. If Life on the Fast Lane is one of the best marriage drama episodes of the series, then this is one of the weaker ones. Because this episode doesn't really become a marriage drama until the second half. The first half being Marge and Homer throwing a party, and Homer embarrassing himself. Honestly, I love this part of the episode, and think it is comedy gold, along with setting up why Marge is so mad at Homer. But after that, and another scene setting the marriage retreat up, we only have half the episode left. That's before I mention there's another subplot about Grandpa doing a poor job babysitting, which eats up an amount of time as well. So the marriage stuff gets zero time to play out. You can tell they really wanted to take this aspect of the episode and go pretty far with it, showing us stuff about their marriage we haven't seen before, but they don't get the time to do that. But even if I ignore the fact that this episode is underdeveloped and paced strangely, that doesn't change how much of a chore the second half is to sit through. The grandpa stuff adds nothing and isn't funny at all, and the marriage stuff is just so repetitive and things we've already seen before, which makes it so boring. It adds and shows us nothing new about their relationship and ends on such a dumb non-ending that doesn't wrap anything up. Once again, maybe it would have been more interesting if it would have gotten more time, which brings me back to my point that the episode is paced poorly and that definitely should have been fixed. But even if it wasn't, the marriage drama and the grandpa plot still could have been more funny or interesting as it is. So what happens when I like the first half but hate the second? Say it with me, everybody. It's okay. The reason I put this below the others, though, on this list, is because this episode has the least going for it. The other episodes have some interesting edge to make them stand out in a positive way. Even Old Money, the episode that doesn't really have an interesting edge, at least is creative in the way that it's one of the few solo grandpa episodes, and the first in the series, along with it being pretty funny throughout. This episode just has nothing pushing it in much of a positive way, even if it does still have some things I like. It's still an okay episode, which is why it's not number 1. Number 2, best. Bart gets an F. Well, I love Bart's Thanksgiving, and everything that episode tries to accomplish with Bart's character, Bart gets an F is on a whole nother level. This episode doesn't look at Bart as a whole, but more one specific aspect of him. It answers the question why Bart does poorly in school, and they go so far with answering it. You get to see how he tries so hard to work, but easily gets distracted, how his family doesn't help and constantly pushes him away from getting his job done, unintentionally or intentionally, even if they want him to succeed. How the educators just expect him to fail, and his tutor leaves him. It's all so interesting and makes you fully understand why Bart struggles in school. It's just so interesting because the plot of this episode is also great. Bart having one test he needs to pass, otherwise he has to retake the 4th grade because of all the other tests he's failed, is a great story. And this is when we realize why Bart usually fails, so we get to see him try extra hard to succeed. And it makes you so invested because you like Bart, you understand why he fails, and you don't want to see him fail. And so much happens in the episode to add stakes, while still having many funny jokes, which adds to the overall presentation. So this episode has a great plot, with a ton of stakes that reveals so much about our main character, giving them a level of complexity they've never had before. But what makes this even better is just how relatable it all is. Most people have struggled in school for similar reasons Bart has, and I can safely say I have too. which makes you care even more for Bart, because this episode embodies that mindset and that struggle perfectly, while still making everything else fun and interesting. All this leads to the final scene where Bart does fail his test. And after everything we've learned and seen throughout the entire episode, and having him swindle his way to get every advantage so he could succeed, and fully understanding why he is in this situation and why he needs to succeed, seeing him fail is just so heartbreaking, and it's one of the best scenes in Simpsons history because of that. When Miss Krabappel finds a way to let Bart succeed, you may say it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's still a rewarding ending that shows off a bit about Mrs. Krabappel's character. And it ends the episode on us knowing so much more about Bart and showing him succeeding after working so hard. So yeah, Bart Gets an F is one of the best. It's the first episode of Season 2, and the difference between this and any episode in Season 1 is night and day. This stepped up everything and proves how great every aspect of the show can be, and set the standard for every episode moving forward, which makes it not only one of the best, but also one of the most important. I was really close to putting The Way We Was in this spot, but the reason why I put Bart Gets an F here over that is because I can relate to this episode a lot more, so it just ends up meaning much more to me, along with the fact I think this episode is better paced, written, and goes so much further with its concept, even if The Way We Was hits me a bit harder emotionally. The two were very close, and choosing between them was very hard. But I think Bart Gets an F is just the better episode in the long run. So yeah, this episode truly is a masterpiece. And the fact that it isn't number one shouldn't take away from the fact that it's still an incredible episode. But there was still one better. But before I reveal what either of my picks are, I'm going to go through 9 honorable mentions. No dishonorable mentions because I was barely able to find episodes to fit the worst list as it is. Season 2 was a great season that had 22 episodes, so there were definitely a lot of fantastic episodes that just missed the list, but still deserved to be recognized for their quality. So let's get into it. This is one of the more underrated episodes of the season. Even I forget how great this episode is from time to time, which is a real shame, because this just has such a fun story of Homer getting hair that shows how appearances can really affect your life in a positive and negative way. More specifically in the workplace, how it can cause you to get promoted because you have a good image, or demoted because no one takes you seriously. Along with great jokes and an awesome side character, just makes this an underrated gem that deserves to be talked about much more. The original Treehouse of Horror is great because it's exactly what it says it is. It's just 2 kids telling scary stories to each other in a treehouse. It's great in its simplicity, and if you've ever told scary stories to your friend as a kid, they usually turn out like how Bart and Lisa tell them, which gives this episode a relatable charm, which makes every story really interesting. And the episode is one of my favorite Treehouse of Horrors because of this, even if the stories on their own aren't some of the absolute best. This is the first Mr. Burns-centric episode of the series, and it's a great one. We get to learn a lot about him through a really fun plot involving him running through governor. This episode gets a lot out of its concept, and there are a lot of great jokes because of it. But this has never been one of my personal favorites because I don't find the story that interesting. But I can't deny how funny it is and how much it shows off about Mr. Burns. Along with this episode having one of the best endings of the entire series. Marge does Mr. Burns really dirty, and it's great. This is a great Homer vs. Flanders episode with some fun parodies that play around with the characters and golfing. I know everyone loves this one, and while I do as well, it's definitely on the lower half of honorable mentions, because even if the episode is hilarious, and I love what it tries to do, I've always had a hard time getting into this one, because the entire thing just kind of revolves around the game of golf, which just isn't that interesting to watch. But the episode plays around with its characters and subject matter so well, and is also just hilariously funny, which makes it a great episode. This is an interesting episode which develops Bart and Homer's relationship with an interesting daredevil aspect to it. While I will admit this episode can be a little slow and underdeveloped at points, it's all used perfectly to build to that final gorge scene, which is hilarious. It's one of the best Simpsons scenes, and the episode is still good without it, but it wouldn't be anywhere near this list without that scene being there. It's just so amazing and elevates the episode that much. A lot of people probably thought this would make my best list because of its interesting subject matter of how violent TV can affect children, along with how much this episode gets out of that and its comedy. And while it's super interesting and funny, I never really thought they go far enough with this concept, and certain parts of the episode end up feeling underdeveloped because of that. Especially the ending, which is why it just missed the list, even if I love pretty much everything about it. I just think Bart gets hit by a car is the better episode overall. But you could still consider this my honorary number 6. This is a great Homer character study episode that shows us a lot about how Homer views the people around him, more specifically, his family, along with all of it being obviously hilarious. And while the episode is a bit too slow for my liking, I can't deny how interesting and hilarious it is, along with there being not many other episodes like it in the series. This is just an amazing story based off a strange concept with an interesting new character, and the episode gets a lot out of that strange concept. While I think there are more interesting episodes this season, I can't deny how weird and funny this one is. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was someone's favorite, even if it's not mine. I didn't really like this episode at first because of how weirdly paced it was. But over time, I've grown to really respect how many different things it tries to do, and how down to earth most of the story is, while still being really funny and engaging. While I do think the episode is still strangely paced, and I can't really relate to anything here, if you could relate to this stuff, I could totally understand why this would be one of your favorites. I still think the episode is fun and well put together enough to at least get an honorable mention. Number 1 worst. Bart's dog gets an F. Oh man, the first of many Santa's Little Helper episodes. And just for the record, expect to see pretty much all of them landing on one of these lists, because none of them are very good. While I don't think I could call this awful, it's still a bad episode, and maybe the worst out of all the Santa's Little Helper episodes, where he is the main focus. So why is this episode bad? Well, it's because of how generic and boring literally everything is. The first chunk of the episode is just the dog misbehaving, and that's it. There's no real funny jokes, it's literally just that and not much else. This leads into a plot where if the dog doesn't pass training, they'll have to give him away. This story just sucks and is so generic, along with not being interesting in the slightest. Once again, there just isn't anything to bring it all up, like good jokes or good character interactions. And all this leads to a stupid cop-out ending where Santa's Little Helper all of a sudden starts listening for no reason. It's dumb, makes no sense, and it's just an easy way to end the episode when they couldn't think of a better one. Honestly, I don't have much to say. This may be a very underwhelming number one entry, but that's because this is a very underwhelming episode. All the problems reveal themselves really easily, so there's no reason to go more in depth with it. Unlike There's No Disgrace Like Home, this episode just isn't bad in an interesting way. It's just bad because it's boring and generic. The episode just doesn't deserve the time of day. Once again, it's not that bad because it's more boring than anything, and there are still some funny jokes, even if there aren't a lot of them, and a few heartfelt moments, which do give the plot a little bit more bite, even if not a lot, between Bart and Santa's Little Helper. And the two things I mentioned do work in the episode's favor, but it's still just such a snore for any of that to matter. It's the only bad episode of the season, and no episode was even close to taking the number one spot over it. I know this wasn't very in-depth for reasons I already said, so let's use this extra time to better explain my number one best. Lisa's Substitute. Well, I love every episode on my best list and my honorable mentions, because this was a great season. There was only ever going to be one episode ending up at number one. While this might be a very predictable choice, there was a right and wrong answer here, and I would have been lying if I would have made this list any other way. Simply put, this is easily the best episode of Season 2, no competition. And maybe even the best episode, period. Though, I don't have to decide that today. If you don't know why because you've been living under a rock, I'm gonna go super in-depth explaining why Lisa's Substitute is absolutely amazing. This is definitely an enhanced version of Moaning Lisa, where instead of looking at her general sadness, this episode narrows the scope and shows how the education system and her father fail her. More particularly, her father. As I've said in the last video, Lisa is my favorite character in classic Simpsons, because I've always found her stories the most interesting when done well, and the episode she's in usually goes much further with their plots. And this episode is no exception. It's the reason why I put Moaning Lisa at number one last time. But even though I love that episode, Lisa's Substitute is on a whole nother level because of how much further it goes with showing Lisa's character off, using Mr. Bergstrom as a way to do that, along with being funnier, better paced, but still having a level of rawness that Moaning Lisa had. But what really sets these two apart is Homer's role. You really get to see his relationship with Lisa this time around, which is one of the most interesting dynamics of the show, and this is the best look we've ever seen at it. That's the one thing Moaning Lisa could have gone further with, and they don't make that same mistake here, and go as far as they possibly can with showing off their relationship. Before I dive more into that, I should get into general plots. There are two stories in this episode, a Lisa plot and a Bart subplot. Lisa's story revolves around her substitute teacher, Mr. Bergstrom, bringing out the best in her, and through this, we learn so much about Lisa and what she needs to grow up to be a healthy individual, and what she's lacking in her life. I love Mr. Bergstrom as a foil to Lisa's life, and how, even though he does bring out the best in her, he also reveals many issues she is dealing with. He is just so down to earth and fun to watch, and steals every scene he is in, along with bringing out the best in every character he's around. What makes this even better is how he shows off what a non-presence Homer is in Lisa's life. How part of what makes Lisa so happy when he's around is that he's a strong male role model in her life, who she feels comfortable talking to, which her father has never been to her. Mr. Bergstrom realizes this very quickly and tries to fill the gap between them, knowing if Lisa is going to grow up to be a healthy individual, she needs that lasting male role model because he won't always be there, but Homer will. This story is just so deep and complex, with Mr. Bergstrom being an interesting character to help show all these interesting aspects off. This very complex look into aspects of Lisa's life is balanced perfectly by Bart's subplot, which adds so many great jokes and gives Homer something to be distracted by, which adds to his arc in the episode. It bounces off of Lisa's stuff well and perfectly wraps up in a similar way, along with making the episode paced much better and once again just being so freaking funny. The episode wouldn't be anywhere near as good without it, and it adds an extra element to enhance the episode overall. Honestly, even though I put this episode here for its amazing story and emotional core, I still think it's the funniest episode of season 2. The Bart stuff is hilarious, as I've said, but there are still so many good jokes in the Lisa story as well, that don't just make you laugh, but add certain things to showing off the personalities of characters, along with enhancing the mood of the scene, and really showing off what tone they're trying to achieve. Yes, the jokes don't just play off the plot, they enhance pretty much every aspect of it, and make the episode better because of that. This is so impressive, and the episode only gets better from here. After everything in the episode, it all builds up to the best scene in the entire series, the train scene. This scene is perfect, and plays off of everything we've learned about Lisa and Mr. Bergstrom throughout the episode. How Lisa is so sad that he has to leave, but it was inevitable. But at the same time, he was still the first thing in her life that was really important, and was nothing but a force of good for her, and was helping her figure out her problems. So having to see him leave when she still has so much to deal with, and seeing her get so sad after everything else in the episode, it's all just so heartbreaking. And the scene is paced, directed, and acted beautifully. The acting in the scene is some of the absolute best of the entire show. And this all plays into the fact you don't know how she's gonna deal with her issues once he is gone. But then he gives her a note that reads, "I am Lisa Simpson." It's such a great moment that makes me tear up watching it. It's so simple, but means so much, and there are so many ways you can interpret it. After that amazing climactic scene that says so much while saying so little, and wraps up certain aspects of the episode, while just being so emotional and heartbreaking and revealing, the episode doesn't stop there. The episode cuts to the Simpsons family eating dinner, and Lisa tries to explain what happened to Homer. But Homer cares so little, and says the line, "Just because I don't care doesn't mean I don't understand." And it's such a slap in the face after a great scene. And Lisa, rightfully so, gets mad at him. And while it's really satisfying in a sense, and justified, it makes you realize, even if Lisa is accepting of who she is, and is proud of the person she wants to be, Homer will always be a force of negativity in her life. And if the train station scene is the best scene in the entire show, then Homer's final confrontation with Lisa is a close second. This is the kind of scene that completely makes and defines a relationship. It is so interesting. And I think this is the kind of ending scene that Moaning Lisa could have really benefited from. It shows off so well Homer's views on his daughter, and how even though he doesn't care about some of her problems, or at least gives off that impression, that's only because he's super disconnected from her issues, because he can't relate. And how even with that, he still loves his daughter and wants to give her the best life with the most opportunities, but can't always do that because he is just so different from her and doesn't know what she needs. So he tries to be supportive and he tries to be there, but it's usually easier to just go check on what Bart's doing, who he can relate to more. It's so interesting and develops their relationship so well and wraps the episode off on a perfect note. You really get a sense of how important Lisa is to Homer, and how, even though they both don't always understand each other, they still love each other deeply, and they do have issues that they need to work out. The scene is just incredible, is so introspective and heartwarming, thanks to the really nice music that plays in the background, even if it might be a little manipulative. I also like how the episode doesn't stop there, and it shows Homer have one last conversation with Bart and a little scene with Maggie, and I think this wraps up the entire episode as a whole really well, along with tying the Bart story back in. And this just makes the episode honestly perfect. It's just a perfect package. The episode is just that good. You really get to see Homer's relationship with all of his kids. And the episode uses that fully to its advantage, making this just feel so complete. That's why it's so amazing. That reason right there, along with everything else. So, honestly, this is the best episode of the show. I know not everyone will agree with me on that, but it's super introspective, super complex, has great joke after joke, does everything it tries to do perfectly, and shows off my favorite character and the best relationship on the show at its absolute best. It truly is a masterpiece in every sense of the word, and while I love the other episodes on this list, this one completely blows all of them out of the water. And while there are great episodes in other seasons, they also don't come anywhere near touching this absolute gem. This episode gets all the love it deserves for good reason, and it is easily the best episode of season 2. No question. And with that, the list is done. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more content similar to this in the future. Also, leave a comment telling me what you thought of my list and what would have been on your own list. The next video will not be Simpsons related. I will get to season 3 eventually, but I want this channel to be about TV show lists. Many different TV shows. And I have a ton of ideas for upcoming videos, but nothing set in stone quite yet. I may make an update when those videos are closer to being done, but I'm not sure right now. I want to make this my hobby because I enjoy doing this. I love talking about TV shows, and there are just so many of them I would love to cover on this channel in some way or another. So if you've enjoyed my content so far, once again, please consider subscribing if you are interested to see me cover many more shows in the future. You can also leave me a comment telling me a show you would like me to cover, and I just might do it. But with that, until next time, this is Chocolate Guy, signing off.